The fairies decided to give a party one night and invited the goblins, but they did not ask the gnomes because they did not think of them. The gnomes live so deep in the earth that the fairies seldom meet them, and so they really forgot and did not in the least intend to slight them. But the gnomes heard the goblins talking about the party one night, and they were very angry because they were not asked also. The woods were very beautiful, and some of the trees were wearing their red and yellow leaves, for it was late in the summer. When the moon came out, the green and red and yellow made a pretty picture, and the fairies were delighted with the setting for their party. The fairy queen had a new carriage made from a petal of a white lily and drawn by 2 butterflies. The fairies all had dresses of pink rose petals, and they had the fireflies in all the bushes and trees where they looked like so many tiny electric lights. Their table was spread on a big rock. The rabbits were to wait on the table because their coats were white, and squirrels were to do the cooking in a little hollow. The tablecloth was spun by a spider and was so beautiful that the queen, when she saw it, thought it was a shame to cover it with dishes. So she had the rabbits put the food on a rock behind a tree and leave the beautiful cloth so the goblins could see it. But when the goblins arrived, they looked at the table with dismay. "Are we not going to have anything to eat?" they asked one another, seating themselves at the table and looking with an anxious eye. Not a word did they say to the queen about the beautiful cloth, and she found that it was quite wasted on the greedy little goblins. There were so many goblins that the fairies were obliged to spread a table on the ground for themselves. And when the rabbits appeared with the food, the goblins jumped up and helped themselves before the rabbits could serve them. At last the queen, seeing that it was of no use to have waiters for the goblins, told the rabbits to put the ice cream and cake and lemonade and all the nice things on the table and let the goblins help themselves. The bad goblins spoiled the beautiful cloth the spider had taken so much trouble to weave. They spilled the lemonade and they crumbled the cake, and the poor queen was in despair. The goblins, not getting the food quick enough to suit them, had climbed on the table, which, you remember, was spread on a rock. Now this rock did not have any moss on it, and it happened that it was one of the doors to the home of the gnomes. The gnomes are little brown men, and they hide under the rocks and sticks that are so near the color of themselves that they cannot be seen. So they have been watching all that went on at the party, and when they saw the goblins on top of one of their rocks, part of their number hurried into the earth and opened the stone where the goblins were. Some of the goblins were quick enough to escape, but most of them went into the ground, and all of the cake and candy and ice cream with them. The queen and her fairies jumped up and looked around. Everything was changed, and the fairies shivered as they looked. The trees were brown, and the bushes and the leaves were falling from the trees, making the ground look as though it had a brown carpet over it. The air was frosty, and the poor little fairies looked about in amazement at the dreary scene before them. The goblins that escaped were running around and calling on the fairy to help them rescue their brothers. "It is your fault," they told her. "If you had asked the gnomes to your party, this would not have happened. Now you must help us get our brothers out of the power of those bad gnomes." "What shall I do?" asked the poor queen. She felt that her party had been a failure, and thought if she had asked the gnomes, it could not have been worse. Just then a goblin came running toward them. He had been sent by the gnomes. They told him to say that his brothers would all be held prisoner until the fairies sent them all the ice cream they wanted. The fairies and the goblins hurried to the kitchen in the hollow, but it was empty. The squirrels and the rabbits had hurried off when they felt the frosty air and saw everything turning brown. "What is to be done?" asked the goblins. "You ought to help us," they told the queen again.
If we had not come to your party, we should not have gotten into trouble."
The queen could not resist replying to this remark the second time. "If your brothers and you had not climbed on the table, but kept your seats as well-behaved goblins should, you would not have been in need of help." "We must go to work," she said to her fairies. "Fold your wings and pin up your skirts. We must make ice cream for those wicked gnomes." They worked all night, and just before it was light, the goblins carried ice cream and nutshells to the rocks of the gnomes. And by, the captured goblins came out and joined their comrades.
"We lost our supper,"
said the goblins to the fairies.
"and you should give us our breakfast. We are hungry. If it had not been for your party, we should not have lost our supper."
This was more than the poor tired queen and her fairies could bear. They took their wands from under their wings, and waving them, they flew toward the gnomes. Little sparks darted from the wands, and every time a spark touched a goblin, it left a little red mark, and at the same time it pricked them. Such tumbling and scampering you never saw as the goblins tried to get away. And when a goblin that has a red spot on his face meets a fairy, he hides or runs, for he knows that she will point him out as one of the greedy goblins who tried to make the fairies cook their breakfast for them. End of chapter 7.